Yeah, I'm going to miss James Watt. I really miss James Watt, as I missed Earl Butts.
He's not going to miss you.
No, he's not going to miss me.
Who can't you tease and make jokes about?
Mother Teresa's a bad subject.
I would think so.
You don't get big laughs from Mother Teresa.
Johnny Carson may have ruled late night with effortless wit and a twinkle in his eye, but off camera, his world was far less polished. Beneath the charm was a man grappling with deep emotional wounds, fractured relationships, and moments of controversy that few ever saw. His laughs masked loneliness. His applause drowned out personal pain. Among the thousands of guests who shared his stage, there was one who left him cold, unlike anyone else. But that clash was only part of a much bigger picture. Affairs, betrayals, scandals, and a complicated past with the one woman he could never please. Carson's life was a storm under the spotlight. One guest may have crossed the line, but the real story stretches far beyond a single name. Curious? You should be. The pain behind the persona. Johnny Carson wasn't just a legendary entertainer. He was a master strategist when it came to controlling his domain. While audiences saw a charming, effortless host each night, few knew that Carson was locked in ongoing power struggles with NBC executives behind the scenes. From the 1970s onward, he fought to maintain creative and contractual control over The Tonight Show, setting a new precedent for television talent. He negotiated terms that allowed him to own the show's master tapes, choose his staff, and even reduce the show's runtime from 90 to 60 minutes. Decisions made not just for comfort, but for influence. Carson's battles for control were strategic and precise. At one point, he used the threat of moving to another network as leverage to negotiate a more favorable deal with NBC, one that made him one of the highest-paid performers in TV history and gave him final say over nearly every aspect of production. His quiet but firm resistance to network interference helped shift the power dynamic in favor of talent, paving the way for future hosts like David Letterman and Conan O'Brien to demand similar levels of autonomy. Rarely voiced in public but heard behind closed doors, Carson usually got his way. He chose his writers, demanded little interference from advertisers, insisted upon loyalty amongst his staff, and quietly replaced personnel who failed to meet his high expectations. While this sometimes led to tense conditions in the production environment, it also guaranteed that The Tonight Show conformed to Carson's demands, a standard from which audiences would not have deviated. By the time of Carson's retirement in 1992, he had written a new late-night playbook with chapters not just about the show, but dealing with business. He left the show not just a favored entertainer, but a trailblazer who changed the rules of engagement for television stars with their networks. Behind the laughter and applause was a man who understood the power of leverage and was willing to use that leverage to cement his legacy and protect his craft. Carson's most extraordinary leverage may never have been performed in front of the camera, but rather quietly exercised behind it. But for all the control Carson wielded on stage and in boardrooms, there was one influence in his life he never managed to escape: mother wounds and emotional distance. Johnny Carson, the legendary host of The Tonight Show, may have exuded confidence and charisma on screen, but his personal life told a far more complicated story, especially when it came to his relationship with his mother, Ruth Carson. According to those close to him, including his former attorney Henry Bushkin, Johnny harbored deep resentment toward Ruth, whom he described as cold, unloving, and impossible to please. Despite his historic success as a comedian and TV icon, Carson often lamented that he could never win his mother's approval. Her emotional distance and constant disapproval left a lasting mark on him, one that shaped his interpersonal struggles and psychological defenses for the rest of his life. Carson often blamed Ruth for many of his adult shortcomings, including his failed marriages and emotional volatility. In private conversations, he would say she had tampered with his life, casting her as a key source of his inner turmoil. Rather than express pride in his accomplishments, Ruth remained indifferent, reportedly never fully acknowledging his fame or the cultural impact of The Tonight Show. Carson's need for external validation from audiences and lovers alike seemed to stem from this maternal void. While fans saw a quick-witted performer, behind the curtain was a man continually wrestling with feelings of inadequacy and rejection. This was the most visible and undeniable rupture in their relationship. Following the death of Ruth, Johnny Carson shocked even his closest friends when he did not attend her funeral. Asked why he declined to attend the funeral, the only chilling statement he made publicly was, "The Wicked Witch is dead." The cold retort revealed just how much emotional damage had been done. Death for Carson was a liberation, and not a time for mourning. There was no last reconciliation, no word of grief, only a cold, symbolic severance of a toxic bond that had haunted him for decades. Carson's unresolved grief over his mother manifested in his general emotional detachment later in life. He struggled with truly intimate relationships, seldom admitted strong emotions, and usually kept friends and family at a distance. Friends, or those who knew him well, connected his emotional distance from the dispassionate eye with which he grew up under Ruth. Besides the warmth and comedic genius he personified on stage, Carson's life was marked by great solitude, a reality that emphasized how deeply childhood wounds can follow a person even in the heights of fame and fortune. Dark fatherhood and family estrangement. Despite his iconic status as a beloved entertainer, Johnny Carson's role as a father was marked by emotional detachment and strained relationships, particularly with his 3 sons from his first marriage to Jody Wolcott. Carson's demanding career and distant personality left little room for family connection. He was rarely present in his children's lives and showed minimal emotional investment, often prioritizing work or socializing over fatherhood. Those close to the family noted that Carson maintained a cold, often aloof demeanor, even toward his own sons. His parenting style, or lack thereof, created an emotional chasm that widened over time and became impossible to bridge. The most tragic example of this estrangement was Carson's relationship with his son Richard "Rick" Carson. Rick struggled with mental health issues throughout his life and was reportedly institutionalized for a time. According to various accounts, Johnny not only avoided visiting Rick during his treatment, but also largely cut him out of his life emotionally. At a public event celebrating The Tonight Show's 25th anniversary in 1987, Rick's intoxicated behavior reportedly infuriated Johnny, who berated him in front of guests, friends, and NBC executives. Witnesses claimed the confrontation became so heated that others had to intervene to prevent it from becoming physical. Sadly, the late connection between Carson and Rick would continue to haunt him. On June 21, 1991, a most unfortunate mishap. Rick Carson met his death upon forgetting his vehicle driving down a river cliff located in Cayucos, California. He was only 39. Although a tribute was aired for Rick by Johnny, as it appeared on The Tonight Show, where Rick's son was showcased with his photos, many in the audience noted the included segment seemed more performative than it did heartfelt. Though moving for the time and place, it would do little to mask the emotional absence and missed reconciliations of bygone years. Those who knew Carson in private commented that this tragedy went to only darken the shades of guilt cast over his already complicated emotional life. Carson's problems with his family dynamics remained largely unresolved until his death. While he maintained a relatively cordial public persona, He was reticent in his interactions with the world, even with his surviving sons. His inability to nurture meaningful relationships with his children seemed to mirror the same coldness he attributed to his mother, Ruth. Carson had, in many respects, repeated the very cycle of emotional neglect that he so deeply resented. The story of Johnny Carson's fatherhood presents a sobering contrast to his public persona and reveals a man who could conjure laughter from an entire nation, but struggled deeply to love and connect within his own family. Women, affairs, and consequences. Johnny Carson's on-screen charm and quick wit may have made him a beloved television personality, but behind the scenes, his personal life was marked by serial infidelity and fractured relationships. Married 4 times, Carson repeatedly betrayed his wives, often engaging in extramarital affairs with younger women, including models and celebrities. His most notorious affair during his second marriage was with Playboy bunny Angel Tompkins, which unfolded while he was still married to Joanne Copeland. Rather than hide the affair, Carson appeared indifferent to its implications, once quipping dismissively when confronted about it, reflecting a broader pattern of emotional detachment in his relationships. Carson's third marriage to model Joanna Holland followed a similar trajectory. Though she initially appeared to tame some of his reckless behavior, Carson continued his womanizing ways even after tying the knot. He attempted to atone for his infidelity with extravagant gifts, including a luxury apartment at the Pierre in New York City, a Rolls-Royce, and expensive jewelry. These offerings, however, were little more than band-aids over deeper emotional wounds. His inability or unwillingness to remain faithful ultimately led to yet another bitter divorce, finalized in 1985 after Holland filed papers without warning on their 10th wedding anniversary. Even after failing time after time with women, Carson was publicly unrepentant, seeming instead to consider infidelity as something inevitable. But his very personality and fame encouraged it. His own lawyer, Henry Bushkin, had advised him to be careful and discreet lest he risk his divorce settlements, but Carson paid little attention to such warnings. Most of his affairs have other people talking, and he rarely tries to deny it. Rather than face the now damaged ground, Carson invariably buried such emotional consequences in work and alcohol, and distanced himself from those closest to him. Some stories suggest he used charm as a weapon and discarded women on a whim when they ceased to amuse him. A lot of his wives and many of his lovers went to their graves without saying a word about their relationships, but a few, such as Joanna Holland, later said much about having been hurt badly by his actions. Johnny Carson was great at late-night television, but when it came to his personal life, he was at a loss when establishing these types of great, sustained, and respectful relationships to endure fame's glaring effects. His fame in film is shadowed by the emotional debris he leaves behind in his private life, being beholden to humility. The despised guest. Despite Johnny Carson's reputation for maintaining a smooth and professional demeanor with his guests, one celebrity consistently tested his patience: Bob Hope. While Hope was a beloved comedy legend in his own right and a frequent guest on The Tonight Show, Carson reportedly couldn't stand working with him. The root of the tension stemmed from their drastically different comedic styles. Carson thrived on improvisation, quick wit, and authentic interaction, whereas Hope insisted on following tightly scripted jokes and pre-arranged segments. This rigid approach disrupted the natural rhythm of Carson's show, frustrating the host who valued spontaneity above all else. As Hope's health and cognitive abilities declined with age, his appearances became even more problematic. He reportedly struggled with both hearing and vision, making live interviews awkward and disjointed. In an effort to compensate, Carson's production team created a strict script for each segment involving Hope, requiring Johnny to ask predetermined questions so Hope could deliver rehearsed punchlines. This arrangement turned their exchanges into something closer to a forced performance than a genuine conversation. According to those close to Carson, he found these segments not only tedious, but emotionally draining. Carson's unease was evident to those behind the curtain. Backstage staff characterized the environment as strained whenever Hope was to appear. While Carson never publicly insulted Hope, he did vent to his co-workers. He once said, "Guys, if I ever turn out to be like that, I want you to shoot me," referring to his fear of aging into an unnatural scripted entertainer. This wasn't mere professional irritation. Carson was actually saddened to watch a fellow icon decline, particularly in an environment where thinking on one's feet and charisma were paramount. The irony is that both men contributed to a definition of an era in American comedy, but their relationship was one of the most tense in late-night television annals. Hope appeared on the program well into the 1980s, primarily because of his fame and not because Carson wanted him there. Their exchanges are a peek behind Carson's closed facade, in which his patience had boundaries, and even a national icon such as Bob Hope could come up short. The tension between them is one of the most buzzed-about instances of how even the most veteran performers can rub each other the wrong way when artistic visions don't meet. Yet Carson's frustrations weren't limited to difficult guests. At times, his own humor pushed things too far. Cruel comedy and offended guests. While Johnny Carson was widely praised for his sharp humor and impeccable timing, not all of his jokes landed well, especially with the guests who found themselves on the receiving end. One particularly notorious incident involved actor Raymond Burr, best known for his roles in Perry Mason and Ironside. During Burr's appearances on The Tonight Show in 1968 and again in 1976, Carson made repeated jokes about Burr's weight, turning him into the punchline of the evening. Burr was so offended by the fat-shaming remarks that he refused to return to the show after his second appearance. What Carson intended as light-hearted jabs were, to Burr, deeply humiliating, and the rift between the two was never mended. Another uncomfortable moment came when Carson turned his comedic focus on one of the most beloved figures in children's television, Fred Rogers. In a parody skit, Carson portrayed Mr. Rogers as a greedy and manipulative character who encouraged children to steal money from their parents. The sketch was meant to be humorous, but the backlash was swift. Rogers, known for his integrity and kindness, was deeply hurt by the portrayal. For someone who had devoted his career to teaching empathy and morality to children, the parody felt like a betrayal. Carson later issued an apology after learning how personally Rogers had taken the skit, though the incident lingered as a stain on his otherwise admired comedic legacy. Carson was finding it difficult to connect with the odd younger performer sometimes, such as that awkward date British pop singer Morrissey had in the 1990s. Morrissey had been wildly popular with fans and was building a name for himself in America, but his moody persona and his sort of sad songs fought against being integrated into Carson's bright comedy show. On the night of Morrissey's appearance, the audience was filled with swarms. The other guests paled in attendance. Carson appeared to be irritated and disconnected as he delivered an unusually flat monologue and failed to engage meaningfully with the night's tone. It revealed limitations for Carson to cope with the changing pop culture dynamics. These momentary glimpses provide free access to another side of Johnny Carson, not always consistent with the shiny public persona he cultivated. Indeed, he was a master of the late-night format. But then again, there were times when his jokes misfired in front of the audience, and then traversed from clever to cruel. To some guests, Carson's humor felt more like an ambush than a spotlight. These were quite rare moments in a long and glorious career. Yet they hinted at the perilous place that hosts tread their public and private humiliations toward the masses being tempered by proper respect for their guests. Feuds and falling outs. Despite Johnny Carson's cool on-screen persona and reputation for getting along with most of his guests, several of his professional relationships ended in bitter feuds. One of the most public and enduring conflicts was with singer Wayne Newton. The fallout began when Carson made repeated jokes about Newton's masculinity on The Tonight Show, which Newton took as deeply personal attacks. Over time, the jokes escalated, and Newton felt increasingly humiliated. Finally, he confronted Carson in person at NBC Studios and reportedly threatened physical violence if the jokes didn't stop. The confrontation worked. Carson backed off, but the damage to their relationship was irreparable. Another high-profile falling out was with Joan Rivers, a former guest host on The Tonight Show and a longtime friend of Carson's. When Rivers accepted her own late-night talk show on the Fox network in 1986, Carson viewed it as a personal betrayal, especially since her show would directly compete with his in the same time slot. Although Rivers tried to reach out to explain her decision, Carson never spoke to her again. The fallout stunned many, given their long-standing professional relationship and rumored romantic tension. Rivers later claimed in interviews that Carson had a possessive streak and that he took her success as a threat rather than a compliment. Carson had famously banned Little after his impersonations became so good and uncomfortable that Carson could simply not take it anymore. Teasing others was a career for Johnny Carson, but he never wanted to be the target of mockery himself, they say. According to Little and Henry Bushkin, Carson suffered a bruised ego first and foremost because Rich Little's winking take on Carson channeled elements of personality Carson would rather keep hidden. Though the reason behind the ban was never made clear, in effect, it meant that Little was quietly stricken from the list of future guests, and that was it. Carson simply would not offer a man invitations after he so mocked him on national television. Such getting even set Carson apart from his public persona as a congenial host. An envious, insecure desire for control manifested itself in Carson's outbursts with more than one star. These collisions left him ever able to carry a vengeful grievance almost to the point of total estrangement. Indeed, beyond reach of reconciliation. While he had great charisma and humor, those who were closest to him knew that crossing Johnny, either personally or professionally, would come with consequences that would often last a lifetime. Scandals, jokes, and public backlash. Johnny Carson's quick wit made him a beloved figure in American entertainment. But it also occasionally sparked unintended chaos. One of the most notorious examples came in December 1973, when Carson jokingly claimed during his monologue that there was a national toilet paper shortage. Though intended as a harmless gag, many viewers took the comment seriously. Panic buying ensued almost immediately, with consumers flooding stores to stockpile toilet paper, causing a real shortage across the country. Retailers were forced to ration supplies, and manufacturers had to ramp up production to meet the artificial demand, all because of one offhanded joke. The media quickly picked up on the situation, and the New York Times criticized the incident as a classic case of how misinformation spreads. The unintended consequence of Carson's punchline became a national talking point and demonstrated just how powerful his influence had become. Realizing the seriousness of the public reaction, Carson later issued an apology, admitting that he never expected the joke to trigger widespread panic. While many found humor in the absurdity of the situation, others saw it as a sign of the growing influence and potential irresponsibility of late-night television hosts. Carson's comic performances have also played up the public image of political and celebrity figures, sometimes to tragic effect. One such case is his undeviating satire of Gary Hart, the Democratic frontrunner for president, whose campaign eventually crumbled after his extramarital affair was exposed. Every night, Carson would joke about Hart and the much-publicized picture of him with Donna Rice on a yacht named Monkey Business, turning a political scandal into a cultural punchline. Carson was not the only late-nighter ragging on Hart, but it is easy to argue that his contributions compounded the humiliation and might even have contributed to the candidate's defeat. Beyond politics, Carson went personal most of the time. Between the jibes were repeated robbing at public figures like Raymond Burr and Wayne Newton. Consider his parody of the very popular children's show host, Mr. Rogers, who was painted manipulative and money-hungry, an idea that sat badly with the famous, gentle, sincere educator. Although regarded highly for his timing in comedy and cultural insight, these incidents showed a more divisive vein of his humor. Some would call it humor. Others would say that it brought about controversies, sullied reputations, and illustrated how outrageously fine the edge is between comedy and consequence. Sex tape scandal and posthumous revelations. Years after Johnny Carson died in 2005, a shocking revelation emerged that cast a new light on the late-night icon's private life. A sex tape featuring Carson and a woman believed to be one of his wives surfaced in 2014. The tape, reportedly recorded in the 1970s when Carson still had dark hair, showed him in explicit scenes near a swimming pool and later in a bedroom, lasting approximately 20 minutes. While the woman's identity was never officially confirmed, her appearance and hairstyle closely resembled Joanna Holland, Carson's third wife, whom he married in 1972. The footage was quietly sold to a private collector after the Carson estate refused to pay for its return, and only still images were released to the public. The video's sudden appearance, nearly a decade after his death, stunned both fans and former colleagues who had long regarded Carson as intensely private. It also reopened discussions about how much of his personal life had been carefully curated and how much had been deliberately hidden. What made the scandal more disturbing was the way it was handled. Rather than threatening legal action, Carson's estate declined to negotiate, possibly to avoid drawing further attention. The collector chose not to release the video, but leaked stills, which quickly made their rounds online. For a man known for his meticulous control of his public image, the exposure of this intimate material posthumously was a sharp blow to his legacy. Had Carson still been alive, many believe he would have fiercely fought to keep it private, as he had spent his entire career guarding his personal life from media intrusion. As for having a sex tape, there was definitely more soil to spill when he was dead. His biographer, Henry Bushkin, an attorney and confidant for almost 2 decades, generated a memoir that described an image of a character quite different from the public perception. According to Bushkin's description, it was filled with R-rated incidents, including frequent affairs, inappropriate comments, and bouts of heavy drinking. He would cite that book for cases in which Carson allegedly broke the law, such as breaking into his wife's apartment to check on infidelity, and provided stories about how his erratic behavior put stress on both his personal and professional relationships. In addition, there were whispers of improprieties and indecent harassment that never included an official report against Carson. Not a single suit was officially filed against him, but several women later came out to shed light on strange incidents as indicators of aggressiveness or manipulation behind closed doors. These stories may not come with official accusations against the man, but they are in sync with the darker picture painted to those in his close work environment. The combination of the sex tape scandal, Bushkin's exposing memoir, and decades of whispered rumors really complicated that clean-cut image Carson carried around while he was in active service, exposing a man whose off-camera life was often at odds with the entertainer the world adored. While whispers swirled after his death, Carson had already closed the curtain on his own terms, far earlier than most realized. Controlling legacy and final years. Johnny Carson's final years were marked by a deliberate and strategic retreat from public life, a choice that reflected both his fiercely private nature and his need for control, qualities that had defined much of his career. Unlike many celebrities who linger in the spotlight past their prime, Carson chose to exit gracefully. In 1992, after 30 years at the helm of The Tonight Show, he stunned fans by announcing his retirement while still reigning as the undisputed king of late-night television. With ratings still strong and public affection unwavering, Carson explained that he wanted to leave while he was still on top, a decision that earned him both respect and admiration in the industry. Throughout his time on The Tonight Show, Carson maintained extraordinary control over the program's format, content, and schedule. In the 1980s, he successfully lobbied NBC to shorten the show from 90 minutes to 60 minutes, citing exhaustion and a desire for better pacing. The network complied, fearing he might jump ship, an indication of the power he wielded. Carson even had the authority to approve guest hosts and staff changes, a level of autonomy rare for television talent. This control ensured the show's consistency and quality, but it also reflected Carson's need to keep his surroundings tightly managed, both on and off camera. Following his retirement, Carson almost completely disappeared from public sight. He refused most interviews, made only the occasional public appearance, and eschewed commenting on the post-Carson era of late-night television. In private, he was dismayed at the tabloid-oriented reality show direction TV had taken. As related by filmmaker Peter Jones and others who shared meals with him during these years, Carson regretted what he perceived as a falling off in substance and wit. He had no interest in returning to a landscape that he felt had fallen off in taste and quality, instead opting to enjoy sailing, reading, and keeping out of the public eye. Carson's retirement was just as carefully planned out as his on-air career. His last Tonight Show appearance, broadcast on May 22, 1992, attracted almost 50 million viewers, a record for a late-night send-off. It included heartfelt testimonials by Robin Williams and Bette Midler, but was otherwise quintessentially restrained. In his final monologue, Carson thanked his staff and audience, dispensing some final advice: nothing lasts forever. He was ending on the right note for a historic streak. Unlike most of his successors, Carson never tried to come back. He went out on his own terms, leaving an empty chair but an indelible mark of his excellence, and a reminder that true power is about knowing when to release. Carson's departure also indicated a broader cultural transformation in the way performers, especially television legends, treated legacy during the late 20th century. Unlike other aging stars who held on to the limelight, Carson saw the merit in departing while still respected, a practice generally likened to sports heroes such as Michael Jordan or Sandy Koufax, who retired at their height. His choice established a precedent in late-night TV, where hosts had been regarded as fixtures for years until ratings fell or contracts were up. As media critic Tom Shales wrote, Carson didn't just know when to leave, he understood that the way you leave becomes part of your legend. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Johnny Carson's hidden life and unforgettable moments, don't forget to like the video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more untold stories from the world of entertainment. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. And be sure to check out the next video on your screen for more surprising twists behind the legends you thought you knew.